Howdy all you delicious people. For the Power Rangers Zeo episode, I had made a little bit of a mistake. I guess the Power Rangers episode is to, of course, be Power Rangers Zeo episode 43, The Brief Mystery of Time. I, of course, was go on to one app and it stated 44, but it seems when I'm to go on into IMDb and both YouTube, it says 43, so a mistake on my part, but I wanted to let everybody know of that mistake before the video starts rolling and you start to hear me, of course, state that this was episode 44 when really it was episode 43. So I wanted to clear that up. So with that said, on to your regularly scheduled review. Howdy all of you delicious people. I am here today to review some Tommy Oliver episodes of Power Rangers. So I really want to go on and state that at some point we're going to cover probably some story arc stuff. There's quite a bit of some fun things story arcing wise that I hope to cover, and I hope to get that right. We, of course, are to have me wanting to cover like the Master Vial metallic armor story arc, which sounds like really fun. They had metallic armor for a brief while. They sparkled before Twilight did. The Power Rangers. And we also may, at some point, once we start getting very thin with Tommy episodes, maybe I might finally go on to really just cover what I thought was my favorite episode of Power Rangers. And really, it may not go on and be like a very action-packed one, but it still may be a fun episode regardless. Still may be a fun episode. But then also, maybe there might be just some big episodes that happened in Power Rangers, or there might be just some interesting episodes that I can cover, or even interesting Power Rangers seasons at some point. Who knows? Depending on how long this lasts. Because there might be some like, oh, okay, I think I want to comb through like the beginning of this season because I never cover this. And we'll just kind of see where that goes. So, but with that said though, I appreciate everybody going on and hearing this out, listening to me and whichever. I really do appreciate it. So, with that said, let's go into these episodes. So, we have the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers episodes, Season 1, episodes 56 and 59, which of course is... 56 is the rivalry spell put on both Jason and Tommy as they are to seemingly work well together in this karate class, but then all of a sudden they are to be bitter enemies within this episode, and they even get to the point of wanting to fight one another, but then at the last minute they have to get pulled out of that because there is more pressing matters, which of course is the slippery shark. So we have, of course, in real life, we had the actors who played Jason, who played Tommy, did have differences. Let's just simply state that. But when you really look at it, they worked so often with one another. So regardless of how the actors may not have liked one another, like, you can also state that, like, well, like, but they spent so much time. Either it mainly just being on screen and whichever, but still. So, with that said, that is what it is. So, we then go on to have episode 59, where when you slap a word like mutant onto an episode, I'm like, I'm intrigued. Very simple enough. But then come to find out, we end up having another version of evil Power Rangers, which of course this is to be the Putty Power Rangers, as I would like to call them. And this episode was pretty fun, pretty interesting, and also we had a goofy villain, because of course we do. But yeah, so with that said, let's go into the Power Rangers Zeo 44 episode. So we have, of course, the Power Rangers that are having a repeated day. And the only person who can go on and realize this is, of course, Tommy. Tommy, of course, is to start to realize that he's facing some deja vu, and it seems that the Power Rangers start to figure it out, what is going on for, of course, the Machine Empire going on and wanting to try and repeat this day so much to, I guess, try and distract the Power Rangers so they can go on and get their cog fleet onto the planet so they can try and take over the Earth. So, with that said, let's just go on and start covering quite a bit of what happens in these episodes. So, of course, let's go on and cover episode number 56. So, and let's just kind of go into spoiler time. So it's about that time yet again. We'll fire this bad boy up. Go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we're going to spoil these episodes. So, first off, we of course have both Tommy and we have Jason who go on to do this karate class for free. It seems because the other Rangers are kind of talking about how like Tommy and Jason are getting getting together really well, and they're teaching this class for free in the juice bar or the youth center. So I always would state that they're probably one and the same, but still. So we have Tommy that goes on it and puts this like elbow pad on his arm and has all the kids like kick it. And we have Tommy, who I think is praising Chris. Then they go on to have, I think, like Melanie or something. She ends up going on and doing like this whole sequence of things, and they're like, all right. So we have both Tommy and Jason working well together, and so we have Rita and we have Goldar, who's like, oh, they're working good together. Oh, I see. Like, we should go on and get the rivalry spell from the Slippery Shark's boomerang and like stop them like working so well together. And Rita, of course, who is now looking into her repulsoscope, because this is the black telescope thing that eventually ends up getting replaced in another episode of which that I have seen recently. So we, of course, have Rita stating that is a really good idea. So we have both Tommy and we have both Jason, who are both walking off, and they're stating on, since these kids are learning karate, Jason is stating how this is going to help them like concentrate more and like focus, and we have Tommy who's like, yeah, like I get what you're saying. So all of a sudden both Jason and Tommy are now to be attacked by putties. And we, of course, have the boomerang coming in. And so Jason ends up alerting Tommy that there's a boomerang coming, and Tommy ends up just catching it out of just a knee-jerk reaction. And all of a sudden, Tommy then goes on to then get hit with this kind of bolt of lightning. What's that? A bolt of lightning! So Tommy falls, and then Jason is like, "Hey, Tom, are you okay?" And he's like, "Yeah, like, whatever that was." So we all of a sudden have Jason and Tommy continuing to fight the putties, and the boomerang comes in yet again, and we have Jason, and you could tell that this shot is, of course, reversed, because, like, there's only, like, you can't deny, but then again, when thinking about it, very ingenious on a number of people for taking this strategy of this, like, reverse shot thing to, and it seemed that a lot of times a lot of different people went on to do this, or whoever directed these episodes all took that idea and just ran with it consistently throughout the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers thing. And so, yeah, I don't know if there was much reverse shots when they went into the later seasons of any other stuff. Like, I would have to go on and really watch closely and just like, oh, like they reversed that shot. But so we have Jason that goes on and is to grab the boomerang like you would kind of like a football, and he kind of catches it that way, like over his head. So we then have Jason that ends up getting zapped as well. So now we have, every time both Tommy and Jason argue now, you see that their eyes just light up blue. So, like, fully blue. So we start to realize that both of them are angry, both of them are upset. And so now, of course, we go on and bring both Jason, we bring both Tommy into other environments for them to continue to be upset. So we have them go on to go to school in English, and we have Jason that just needs to get into his locker, and Tommy's in the way. And Jason's like, "Well, hey, can I get into my locker?" And Tommy's like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And so they end up having a disagreement that leads to them wanting to really just fight in this hallway. Bulk and Skull are like, "Yeah! This will be great! Like, both of them should fight. Yeah, and we'll go in the juice bar and we'll have this, like, unsanctioned fight, and we'll have a lot of people just, like, pay tickets to see them fight. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea," or what I'm just setting up for what ends up happening soon after this. So we have Tommy and we have Jason who are starting to kind of circle around, and all of a sudden Mrs. Appleby is like, "Hey, what's going on here, students?" And I think we have, like, Kimberly and the rest of the Rangers that kind of walk in and like, "Well, hey, like, both Tommy and Jason were just kind of practicing what they were going to teach their karate students later on in their karate class, and that's all that this really was." And Mrs. Appleby is like, "Well, like, you students know better to not do that." And so, because fighting whatsoever is not allowed in a school, even though, man, when I was starting to get out of high school, like, man, like, I would just hear, like, so often that kids were, like, fighting in school, and, like, I would just be like, thank goodness I'm getting out of here. In my senior year of high school, it's like, I do not want to be around this. This is very, like, plus also, like, the school was, like, packed. Like, just packed. Like, I would have to, like, kind of, like, if I would want to go through a hallway, like, I would have to take, like, the longer way around, because there were so many hallways that were just so packed that I really could not go on to, like, get to, like, where I want to go to get to my classes. I would realize, like, yeah, I always have to go through this hallway because like it's a longer stretch, but at least I can get to where I'm going. Or I would just try to like figure out like, okay, I'm gonna go up this flight of stairs and go down and then around, and because yeah, like just to try and avoid the chaos. So anyways, back to what's going on here. So Tommy and Jason are to, of course, be at the juice bar, and they're going to fight it out. We, of course, have Bulk and Skull who are trying to sell all these tickets. We had one guy who was asking for like 20 tickets, and like Bulk just kind of like rattles off all of these tickets, and the guy like rips it off. So, like everybody seems to be like, yeah, like I want a ticket to this fight. You know what? If you could probably just go on and just grab a drink or whatever at the juice bar, you could probably see this fight anyways. That's just me. Just be a customer at the juice bar and you'll be fine. So we have both Jason, we have both Tommy that start to circle around one another again in this mat, and everybody's like, yeah, fight, fight, fight. And we all of a sudden have, of course, them getting the call that Zordon needs them at the command center. So we, of course, have Kimberly and the rest of the Power Rangers go on and break this up between both Tommy and Jason. I think we have Zach stating it's like, well, hey, we need to go. So we have Tommy, Jason, and all the rest of the Power Rangers making their way back to the command center, and they all get back there. So we, of course, have the one, like, really fun moment where Alpha is, like, kind of upset with Tommy. Where it's like, hey, Tommy, like, there's enough room for everybody, Tommy, come on. I thought that was hilarious. I was like, yeah, Alpha, you go. Like, you go bust Tommy's chops. I thought that was awesome. Frickin' Alpha, just like, hey, like, Tommy, I'm standing here. Ay, ay, ay. That was funny. So as we have Jason and Tommy start bickering back and forth, we have Zordon who's like, well, you realize what's all going on between both Tommy and Jason, don't you, Rangers? And they're like, well, yeah, like, both of them are, like, not acting like themselves. And so it's like, well, yes, they're under some rivalry spell given to them by Rita. And they, of course, need to go on to break this spell by fighting together against their foe, which will have to be the Slippery Shark. The goofiest name, but actually the coolest looking monster. I swear to God, that was a cool looking monster. Oh my god, how it just goofily was like, had the fin, and like Tommy and Jason were just chasing after this monster that like was drilling into the ground. I was like, oh, this is pretty sweet. Like, simple, but it is so effective. So we now have the rest of the Rangers that are just at the command center, just chilling out. So we, of course, go on to have the Power Rangers that are watching on as both Jason and Tommy are to be chasing after the Slippery Shark. So what happens is we have Tommy and Jason who are arguing about techniques of how to get to it, where Jason does this like kind of weird like bird thing where he like kind of does his hands as like this bird signal, and I thought that was so weird. And Jason's strategy is that when the shark kind of gets up high, that they should go on and try and get after it that way, kind of jump after it that way. Where Tommy's like, no, like we should kind of have this like underground kind of uh like kind of like playing possum kind of thing, just kind of waiting. And so when it seems that they keep having to go on and chase after this thing, and then finally when they get back together and they're kind of like back to back just going on of like, okay, like where could it be? We then have the slippery shark that goes on and jumps up and like double punches them, and I was like, yeah, you go get him, slippery shark. Goofy name, you. You goofy named monster, you. So, we have the slippery shark that after that attack, both Jason and Tommy are like, okay, like, I think we've had it with this. Like, we've been chasing this thing down. It's been finning all over the place, and we're just running after it and flipping and flopping all over the place. Like, this is getting tiresome. Let's go on, and let's finally realize that we need to work together, and we need to team up. And Tommy's like, yeah, let's work together. So, what they decide to do is just kind of wait there until the shark jumps up, and then we have Jason who stands there, and then Tommy is to like have his foot on Jason's shoulder, and so Tommy jumps up and attacks the shark. It's like, aha, like Tommy attacks the shark with this net. Bizarrely, is that to be called the power net? I was like, it makes a lot of sense because it's a fish monster and you have a net that seems like a very joking way to do things. It also, when looking at it, if you guys have ever seen the Japanese Spider-Man thing, like we really probably have like the Spider-Man, the Japanese Spider-Man that uses this like net, and it's kind of funny. So and if you've ever also seen Japanese Spider-Man, it looks a lot like Power Rangers. I'm not going to state that it's like, oh, well, yeah, like Japanese Spider-Man came first. It really just gave you the idea of what American Power Rangers is going to be, because anybody can go on and refute that, because I know somebody will. But you can also just state that it's similar. It really just is. So we have Tommy that nets the slippery shark, and so we have the Power Rangers that wants to go on and just quickly wipe this thing out. Like, hey, let's get all the rest of the Power Rangers down there now that both Tommy and Jason have worked together. So before it seems that the slippery shark is going to get ganged up on, I think this is, of course, when they make the monster grow. We Megazord up, and we Ka-Slice as per usual, and like we end up just taking down yet another monster. And then at the end of this episode, we had Bulk and Skull that had to desperately run off and tell people, hey, just hold on to your tickets and we're gonna run out of here. So a lot of people got gypped that they, of course, didn't get their money. And so now Bulk and Skull arrive back at the juice bar after both Tommy and Jason are finished with another karate session, as they're kind of going on and doing their session and so on. So we have Bulk and Skull that have torn clothes, because I think people were looking for that money, but they were shaking down Bulk and Skull anyways. So we have both Bulk and Skull that want to go on and just like, well, hey, you better give us that fight that we wanted. And both Tommy and Jason are like, no. So we have Bulk and Skull that just get so upset that they just want to go on and punch both Tommy and Jason but instead they end up punching one another in the fist. So we then, of course, have Jason that goes on to tell his students, it's like, well, hey, like this is why fighting isn't a good idea, and everybody has a good laugh, ha 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 ha, and that's how the episode just kind of ends. So, with that said, let's go on and get into the next episode, which, of course, is episode 59 of season 1. So, here's the thing about this episode. It felt that at some point, Jason had called out for the power blaster, but it sounded like he said like the mega blaster. So I was kind of like looking for like, what is the mega blaster? And of course, this is the combined weaponry of the Power Rangers, and because we also, bizarrely, on the evil side of things, they have all of their own stacked weaponry also. That is to create a power blaster also. So really, we just go on and have to state that this weapon is like this big massive cannon. It looks like an airplane, and so this weapon tends to, at certain points, wipe out a ton of monsters. Here is also the goofy thing. When I was to go on and have a problem with 4 monsters being taken out by 2 Zords, guess what happens in this episode? We technically have 4 monsters needing to be taken out by 2 Zords. And I was like, wait a minute, like, how is it so drastically different between seasons? Is it just that they just didn't have a Mega Dragon Zord? That they didn't have a Titanius? Is that really the huge difference between the seasons? There's like, oh no, like, man, if we would have just had that Titanius, we really just would have had that dinosaur. That extra Zord would have just really, like, made the difference. Or if we would have just had the Mega Dragon Zord. But still, how is it that, like, the previous Zord is so much powerful than the new hotness? A little confused. Shouldn't the newer stuff be even better to just wipe out a ton of Zords at one time? Or a ton of monsters, I mean, at one time? But it just didn't happen that way. It didn't. So, we, of course, go on into this episode, and what we come to find out in this one is that we have Mrs. Appleby that is teaching her class, and Tommy comes in late because he had forgotten to set his alarm clock. So here's the episode where Tommy forgets a lot. He even forgets that he's forgetful, and it becomes a joke. So it's the forgetful episode of Tommy. It is what it is. So we have Bulk that is giving Tommy crap about, of course, him not being on time for class. And it's like, well, hey, like, did you forget that my name is Bulk? So we have Mrs. Appleby that is talking to her students and is to, of course, state while Bulk is still talking. We have Appleby that states that ask anybody that you know, or ask your friends, or ask, of course, maybe even teachers, if there is one trait that they would want you to hopefully change, and try and work on that. How exactly would there be proof of that happening? Would they have to all stand up in class and say, like, I have a problem, like, uh, farting in public, so I got gas X or something. And it cleared that problem right up. I don't know. And they have proof of the gas X. I don't know. Uh, that would just clearly be one thing they should obviously just figure out how to change, right? Who cares? It's farting. It's funny. So we have Appleby just kind of looking at Bulk. It's like, yeah, I know a freaking trait that you could change, Bulk. How about you be nicer to people? But Bulk also makes the clear consensus to Miss Appleby. It's like, well, what if we're perfect? What if there's nothing about us that we, of course, would like to change? And then Appleby's like, well, then you would just clearly get an F on this assignment because obviously everybody has something. So we have Tommy throughout this episode that is to forget his notebook for class, is to go on in his training session with Jason, and we of course have Tommy who is to forget his towel and his drink, and so now Jason is to have to like share all this with Tom. Hey, do you have an extra towel? Jason's like, luckily I have an extra one, here you go. So Tommy is just so like he can't figure out this assignment. And so Jason's like, well, yeah, like I think I need to go on and like figure out what one thing that I can change that'll like work for this assignment. And Jason's like, well, like it's obviously your memory, man. Like you're very forgetful. And Tommy's like, well, yeah, maybe that's it. So Tommy even goes to Kimberly, Trini, and Billy, and so they all start to figure out some strategies to help Tommy. Kimberly ends up giving Tommy a ribbon upon his wrist to remind him that, of course, he is to be forgetful, but when really thinking about it, more than likely Tommy is going to be thinking about the ribbons instead of what he's forgetting. We have Billy that goes on to give Tommy this device that is to help him like with his schedule and with other assortment of things. And so like one of the things that state to Tommy is like, you have school in 10 minutes. And so we have Tommy who's like, oh great, this is really gonna help. So we get to the point where the device that Billy gives Tommy at some point does go on and malfunction. And so Billy's like, well, that wasn't supposed to happen. And Tommy's like, well, great. Like, now I have something that is not going to be helpful. And so, and even the funny thing is, like, all of this stuff is to really just make Tommy even worse off. So, yeah, really does not help Tommy whatsoever. We have Billy and Kimberly talking, saying like, yeah, I think we just made Tommy worse. He's even worse about it. So, I think by the end of the episode, we should have had Tommy, like, remember one key thing, and that was to be like, okay, finally he remembered the one, and so, like, it's gonna go on and just change the character. So that would have been, like, the one thing that they should have gone on and done, but they didn't. So, but we still have Bulk and Skull who are telling Tommy, it's like, well, hey, like, there isn't one thing that needs to change for us, and so Tommy and Kimberly and all the guys are just like, so you're gonna get an F on this assignment, and Bulk and Skull are just like, ugh. So by the end of the episode, we do have Bulk and Skull that come into the school as gentlemen, and they're all wearing these like fine suits, and like Skull has this like this this kind of like this goatee that's like this, more like this though. And so they go on to, of course, give a present to Mrs. Appleby. But then, bizarrely, Mrs. Appleby is to mention that she just painted her nails and she can't open the gift. So we have Bulk and Skull that opens the gift, and they end up getting, like stuff just kind of smacked in their face, because of course this was like a joke gift, and we then realize that certain people can just never change. That's the whole joke. But anyways, let's get on to the whole like fight side of things. I haven't really covered that all that much. So we have Rita, who goes on to talk to Goldar, and Goldar, of course, wants to set up that he wants the putties to get the Badge of Darkness. And so Goldar is to take a number of putties to try to all learn the Power Rangers fight techniques, to try and be able to shadow them. So we have Goldar going through this training regimen, and it seems that one putty continues to fail at every turn. And so Goldar is like, "Hey, Putty 6, it's like, get it together, like, come on." So Putty 6 continues to fail and continues to suck. Even when Goldar is to threaten the putty, it's like, well, hey, like, if you don't get your act together, like, Rita's gonna turn you into, like, a clay ashtray. And so we have Putty 6 that just fails miserably to where he just can't get it. So Goldar is to freaking light him on fire and send him back to Finster's furnace. So Goldar is to just state that there will not be a Red Ranger. It's like, so, like, you didn't do the Red Ranger? Why? But instead, they end up putting a monster in the Red Ranger's place, so I guess it evens out? I don't know. They could have gone on and done, like, something else. They could have really went with trying other things. But anyways, they still had technically 6 things out there anyways. So moving on. So we have Goldar that is to give all these putties the Badge of Darkness, and so we start to see like a different version of Power Rangers where it's kind of like the same Power Ranger costumes, but we then go on to realize that they have like the gray gloves and the gray boots, and they of course have a different belt buckle than the normal Power Rangers. So it's like, okay, this is interesting. So first off, we have both Tommy and we have both Kimberly who are walking along, and all of a sudden we find that the green and pink Darkness Power Rangers have arrived to, or the Darkness, green, and pink Rangers have arrived to fight off both Tommy and Kimberly. Kimberly asks Tommy, it's like, well, hey, do you think that we should morph? And Tommy's like, I don't know, like, I think we should, like, really just try and, like, see what's up with these two, and then, like, assess after that. So, we have both Kimberly and Tommy that go on and start fighting their doppelgangers. And I'm like, well, yeah, you obviously wouldn't have the Rangers and the Darkness Rangers kind of morph at the same time. Like, it just, like, we have to kind of really show the difference here between who's the Ranger and who's not. So we, of course, have Tommy that tries to go on and fight this Putty Ranger. And we, of course, have the Ranger going on doing like the roundhouse kick things that like or the swing kicks that that Tommy likes to do, and so they're kind of doing like very similar move sets, and we have Tommy that's like, like I know you better than you know yourself, ha 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 ha. So we have Tommy that tries to go on and fight against this thing, and he actually does a pretty good job at kind of knocking the wind out of the Ranger to where he kind of is touching the Putty Ranger as it touches his chest. It kind of goes down. We also have Kimberly that fights the Pink Putty Ranger, and so she goes on to do some kind of interesting moves there with her, and so again, they decide to just kind of leave and just kind of go back. So Tommy and Kimberly are just like, okay, like whatever that was. So we now have Goldar, who is, of course, set up here that now they're going to go on and have the Commander Crayfish Monster be leading the Putty Rangers to go up against the Power Rangers. So, Commander Crayfish, that seems so weird of a name, but when looking at it, they couldn't have, like, they would have had to have called it something beyond just crayfish. So, this is to, of course, look very much like a lobster kind of monster, but still like a crayfish is to be kind of its own thing, but still. Of course, if you guys remember those school days when you would have to go on and like have your own little crayfish thing and you'd have to take care of it. It's like, ugh, okay, whatever. So we have, of course, the Rangers that end up going on to... I want to also try to get this right also. I feel like I'm going to mess this up. Like, right in here. Because all that's left is all the action parts, right? So, we have the Rangers going on finding out that Commander Crayfish and the rest of the Putty Rangers have made their way into town and causing chaos. So, we of course have the Power Rangers go on to morph and face off against them. So, we have everybody again going on fighting their Putty doppelganger with the exclusion of Jason. We also had Tommy coming late to this fight because, of course, Tommy had forgotten his communicator in his locker, and so all the rest of the Rangers kind of went on to face Commander Crayfish, and then Tommy comes along, gets his communicator, and then he goes on to morph, and so we then have the Green Putty Ranger go on and face off against Tommy. So all of them go on to face their doppelganger itself, and so then they go on and the Power Rangers decide to get the Power Blaster, and so they take all their weapons and they combine them all together to then go on and put it into the Power Blaster, and the Putty Rangers have their own similar weapon collection, and so we have, of course, where it seems that the evil side wins over, and we then have the Power Rangers that realize, like, okay, let's go back to the command center, because obviously, like, this did not work out. So we have both Zordon and Alpha that go on to give the Power Rangers better weapons, which we even have Zach go on and say it's like, aren't these weapons like the exact same weapons that we already have? And Alpha and Zordon are just like, no, 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 no. Like, this is the newer models. These are, like, you have to go on and buy the newer product. Because we're just going to keep going on and putting these same weapons out in a store somewhere. So they have to go on and buy the newer weapon that is the exact same thing. But hey, you have to go on and re-get it again just to make sure you have it. Because get two of them, get a set of two for some goofy reason. I don't know, like the Power Blaster thing, like never really intrigued me. Of like, yeah, combine all the weapons together in this big cannon-looking thing. I was like, I could do without that. But I get the interesting part about it. It's like all the weapons together is like a team working kind of thing, and I get it. So and it's another product to sell. It's another merchandising thing to sell to people. So it makes all the sense. So because the whole thing about Power Rangers is that sweet merch, and a lot of times I'm sure. Maybe not, like, I'm kind of curious, did Power Rangers go on and get a pretty decent amount of merch sales? Probably for every buck that they made, whatever company that they were tied to made like 20. So I'm really looking at it, like they might have gotten a good chunk of merch sales, but still, like, someone else got a lot more, in all honesty. Or some people just got, like, all they got was really just like, hey, like, I got the X number of money to have gone on and done that show, and that was it. Because surprisingly, like, I would hear from people that did shows, like, they would go on and like, no, I just got, like, the base, like, this number per week, and never saw anything for merch sales. And plus, also, when you think about it, like, that show that I'm talking about didn't have much of merch, so you could probably understand why. It's like, well, hey, man, if it was Power Rangers, they were gonna merch the heavens out of that thing. But you would think that a lot of the Power Rangers that came back later on, like, probably were like, hey, man, like, you better give me some sweet cash out of me going into the. Anyways, moving on. So we have the Power Rangers with these better weaponry, and now we just go right back to have the Power Rangers trying to go on and face off against these putty and crayfish monster fights. And so it seems that the Power Rangers seem to be a kind of their fights are kind of going on better, to where it seems that the weapons are kind of helping in their task. And so now we again have the combined Power Blaster versus Putty Blaster. So we seem to have the Power Rangers that end up blowing away the villains this time around. So we then have Rita that makes the strategy of like, oh, okay, well, hey, like, let's go on and, like, let's immediately, like, make my monster grow. So, like, they'll definitely have, like, an outnumbers game. I think also in the other episode that I was watching, I think there was a moment where the Power Rangers were going to go on and do some tactic to quickly wipe out the slippery shark. And then Rita's like, oh, no, you're not. And so she quickly, like, make my monster grow. And so, like, the Power Rangers had to go on and forcibly Zord up because the shark just kind of, like, slipped away from them. So we have not only the crawfish, but we also have the Putty Rangers both grow into massive size. So I'm like, yeah, it's 4 against 2. Because we have Tommy who daggers it up to get the Dragon Zord. We have the Power Rangers that go on and get the Megazord. And so we end up having, of course, like Tommy is using his like whip tail to kind of smack some of the Putty Rangers, and because that's Tommy's strategy. It's like, well, hey, use your tail to kind of whip some of these Rangers, and we have the Megazord that is trying to go on and try to take down some of these threats. Also, we had at one point where the Dragon Zord was to get going pretty good on Tommy, but then I think both the Putty Black and Blue Ranger kind of fly in and both kick the Dragon Zord at the same time, trying to take it out. So all heck is breaking loose. So we finally just have the Power Rangers that realize that they need to go on and have Titanus, and they need to go on and also Mega Dragon Zord it up and combine Titanus with the Mega Dragon Zord and shoot all of their blasts for them to go on and wipe out the Putty Rangers as well as the Crawfish. And we of course go on and are to be like, why didn't they have this X number of episodes later in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers? Because they had new Zords, because they had a White Ranger, because they had this, because they had that. But again, fights would have been won if they would have just kept certain Megazords. But that's just me stating that I'm really thinking about it. There's a mass number of episodes that you have to go on and kind of go through. So when thinking about it, like what kind of works for one episode, you have to go on and then re-rationalize that it doesn't work for another. So it is what it is. So with that said, now it's time to go on to Power Rangers Zeo episode 44. And this, of course, is the repeated day episode with Tommy. So the episode of this starts with a guy named Steven who is rollerblading through the school. And we have some teachers like, Steven! And like Steven is just barreling through this hallway, smacking into both Kat and Tommy, because now we have Kat and Tommy here. I have to kind of remember who is all the Rangers of all these, because and we also have the Gold Ranger in this one, so we still have Jason, and it's very weird. So we have Tommy and Kat who are complaining about, like, well, like, really, I guess we should, like, have like traffic signs in these hallways. And Tommy's like, or speed bumps. So both Kat and Tommy go to Kat's locker, and it seems that Kat is having problems trying to get this locker open. Tommy hits it, and then it opens, and he's like, ah. So we have Jason and we have Rocky that walk up to Tommy and stating, it's like, well, hey, like, are you guys ready for the test? And I think Tommy says a line of like, well, like, we're ready as we're ever going to be. And he ends up like stating that like well before, like well before, and going, and so and the guys are like, how did you know what we were going to say? So we all of a sudden have the guy next to him who is trying to get into his locker that all of a sudden drops all of this crap And so Rocky ends up helping him out, but we also have Jason that goes on to state to Tommy and Kat that Adam and Tanya are going to meet up with them later on at the juice bar, because I guess Melanie is going on and doing this whole new thing called shaved ice. And so it's like, well, hey, like, are you guys interested? And so Tommy's like, oh, all right. So they go on into the class, and Mrs. Appleby is going on and administering the test. We all of a sudden have Rocky, who does not have a pencil. So they go on and they do the test. So, and I think that's where, like, the first day just kind of, like stops and then restarts. And so, come to find out, we have Prince Gasket and we have Princess Archerina, that luckily I remembered King of the Day, or King for a Day, and it's retying in those characters, so I don't have to I don't have to memorize much or relook into much about these characters, because I luckily know their names somehow. So with all the scatterbrain stuff that I had to go on and just cover through so many seasons now, but so we have at a point for this episode where we bizarrely have, like, Prince Gasket mentioning about this thing called the Croentian or Croentius. I think he states it like seemingly two different ways, but I think he says Croatius. Basically what this is just some weird goofy looking snow globe. And this is to be the one factoring thing that the Power Rangers will have to just break to stop this whole time looping thing. Seems kind of weird. So we continue to have Tommy going through this repeated day. So we again have Tommy and Kat that are making their way into this school, as we have Steven again, who is rolling around in his rollerblades. And we have this teacher who's like, hey, Steven, Steven. So we all of a sudden have Kat that is to kind of pick up her stuff as she drops it. And we have Kat that goes on to state, it's like, well, yeah, like, I feel like this school should have traffic signs, or traffic lights or traffic signs. And Tommy states it's like either that or it's speed bumps. And then Tommy starts to realize, it's like, why does this seem so familiar? It's like, So we then have Tommy and Kat who go to the locker, and immediately Tommy is to smack the locker and knows how to easily open up this locker. And so all of a sudden, Jason and Rocky are coming to Tommy, and Tommy states, is like, well, yeah, like, the test we're ready as we're ever going to be. And Jason's like, how did you know what I was going to say? And Tommy's like, I don't know. And so Tommy rushes to get to the guy before he is to have all that stuff drop out of his locker. And so Tommy stops it from happening. The guy's like, hey, thanks, man. And Tommy's like, don't mention it. So the guy kind of, like, figures out a way to, like, kind of open his locker. And they do, like, all the stuff that they kind of do here, they do just twice. Like, I don't think they do enough with the whole, like, repeating day thing where Tommy really takes full advantage of this, or is to, like, get to a point where it seems like he's done this too often, or we can kind of, like, there's just not enough time in this episode to play around with all of this, and plus also deal with the monster and Megazording it up and all kinds of other things. So there's a lot of stuff that they have to cover in a very 20-minute episode, so they can't really play around really well with a repeated day. But I wish they could have gone on and done some things a little bit better to me, honestly. So we have Tommy that goes and again is to hear about Jason like stating about, well, hey, like Adam and Tanya are going on to the juice bar, and we of course have Tommy who's like, yeah, like shaved ice sounds really good, and like, okay, like Tommy, you're weirding us out. So Tommy goes into the classroom and they start this test, and we immediately have Tommy who gives Rocky this pencil, and Rocky's like, how did you know? And Tommy's like, I'm psychic. I know. I can know what y'all did. So we then go on to have Tommy, Kat, Jason, and Rocky. And Tommy at this point is stating, it's like, I don't know what it is. Like, I know, like, what everybody is going to say. Like, this day feels so much like deja vu. It's ridiculous. So they're walking past this forest. And so come to find out, we have Sprocket and we have Clank and Orbis. And Orbis is kind of like the smaller kind of character that Crank uses to kind of have this chain and fling it so that way Orbis kind of attaches to the monster and then makes the monster grow. So we have Sprocket and we have Crank that are talking, and we have Sprocket that's like, yeah, like, I want to just do one thing, that is to one-up my brother, because I want my mother to think that I'm better than my brother is. And so Crank is to just try to convince Sprocket that this is not a good idea. But they are trying to go on and do this ambush. Honestly, at some point, I want to see a much older version of Sprocket in some season of Power Rangers. I think that would be awesome if we just saw like a grown-up version of Sprocket, and then we'd be like, oh my god, that's the same character from Power Rangers Zeo. That's great. Like, I would also love to see certain characters kind of like get older versions of themselves and like bring them back as something slightly different. But again, I think Sprocket would obviously be the first thing that I would love to have him be like an older version of. But I'm not quite sure if they completely wiped out the Machine Empire, and kind of when thinking about it, like in the in-space thing, they technically did wipe out a lot of things to then have to bring back in Forever Red. It's like, well, not everything was wiped out, but still. We also had that like whole Rita thing where Rita turned out to help the Rangers somewhere down the road later on. But hey, like with Dino Fury going on to bring back Zed, there's a number of possibilities that you can all play with, and plus also like you can do all kinds of things with Power Rangers at some point. To just like retcon or goofily just state that like, oh, like the countdown to destruction in space thing, that never happened, and ooh gee golly, like we had another way to just kind of figure out how to like fix that or retcon that or whatever. Alternate dimensions, other worlds, you can pick for that, and that would be cool if they went that direction. Just state like, well, hey, like if the countdown destruction never did happen, then let's pull from that. So anyways, like we had Rita and both Rita and Zed have a baby that went on to be a son, so why can't we just go on and play with other kind of things? Anyways, moving on. So we have Tommy, Cat, Jason, Rocky walking through this forest, and they get ambushed by Cogs. And so they immediately try to go on and morph and take down all the cogs, and they easily wipe them all out. And so now we end up having Tommy, or we have Kat, who has asked Tommy, it's like, well, did you know about this before ahead of time? And Tommy's like, no, this is new. So we have Kat, Tommy, Jason, and Rocky all meet up with Adam and Tanya at the juice bar. So we finally make it there. And so it seems that I think the Rangers end up getting the shaved ice, but we have Bulk and Skull who are now undercover agents, and they're telling everybody, "Hey guys, we're undercover agents. Yeah, we're so undercover that we have to tell everybody." So we have Bulk and we have Skull. They go into the juice bar, and we of course have Melanie that's saying like, "Well, hey, would you like some shaved ice?" And they're just like, "Nope, like we just want a normal soda." So Melanie gives them those. We have Bulk who is to grab the soda. We have Skull that grabs the soda for Bulk and is continuing to shake it, while kind of behind Skull here. So we have finally when Skull gives Bulk this soda, he then opens it and it sprays all over his face. So we have all the guys kind of laugh and so on and so forth. And so now, of course, we end up going on to another repeated day. So Tommy ends up going on and doing like everything up until the point that he did the day before, up until the whole like the Power Rangers meeting up with the cogs in the forest. He says everything like he did in the he does everything that he did in the prior repeated day, with the exclusion of the cog forest moment. So when Tommy, Jason, Kat, and Rocky make their way to this forest, we now have Tommy that's like really convincing these Power Rangers, like, dude, I know what all is going on. There's gonna be a bunch of cogs and Sprocket and Crake and Orbis. They're gonna be over there. Just go ahead and just look over there. And so Jason goes on to see that Tommy's telling the truth, and Tommy's like, "How did you know all this?" And so Tommy's like, "I don't know, but I think we really just need to go on, and we really just need to go to the command center." Because we had Tommy at some point even know that Bulk was going to get his pop sprayed in the face, and Rocky even tells Tommy, it's like, well, like, but that kind of stuff just kind of happens every day. Wouldn't it be interesting if we had a fourth wall breaking kind of moment for this show, where everybody starts to realize that there's certain things that just start to happen way too often on this show, and we then like have to like go into a world where it just continues to loop and happen, and to where it's like, man, like, why does this have to continue? Like, when like Bulk and Skull would have to get hit with like pies and cakes and all this kind of stuff like every single day, every single episode, like you would think that like you would just see Bulk and Skull with like a million pies just getting hit every time they walk into a room somewhere, and like somebody would just mention, it's like, well, why are they getting hit so, or why are they coming into this room and every time they're getting just pelted with these pies or these cakes or these whatever? Because it's like, well, that's a thing that just tends to happen in Angel Grove every single day. And we have one person that is to finally fourth wall break and tell one of the Rangers, it's like, well, like this is a world that or a universe that like should have like a fourth wall break finally. Wouldn't that be really interesting for a Power Rangers episode? We had one like Dino Thunder episode where they do like technically a fourth wall break, which I think was like lost in translation, where the Dino Thunder Rangers are watching as the Japanese version of Power Rangers is on their TV set. And I was like, oh my god, that's a really cool like fourth wall break. And so I thought that was really interesting. But again, wouldn't it be just we should go on and really have fun with the fact that Power Rangers is to be this really goofy show that has repetitive things in it, and they should finally just make fun of it, do like a fourth wall break thing. But anyways, so like kind of, but still kind of do what they do with like how they did with like Lost in Translation for Dino Thunder. But anyways, we have the Rangers that go to the command center, and so we of course have Alpha that's not ticked off at Tommy again, because hey Tommy, like Tommy, like we could all just stand here, come on, give me some room, Tommy. I'm a little bit bigger than you, Tommy. I have a lot of I got a lot of buttons here. Anyways, so we have Alpha go on to need to scan Tommy because Zordon makes the realization that since Tommy had his brain drained, it seems that Tommy is more sensitive than the rest of the Power Rangers about any kind of abnormalities, or he is just kind of more in tuned to what's going on compared to all of the other people. And so we have Zordon go on to state that we have Tommy realizing the aberrations in the time-space continuum, and that Tommy is like catching on in this repeated day. And so we then have Zordon go on and state that the whole cause of this thing is the Chronsapius snow globe, and that they have to go on and try to destroy that so that way they can go on and stop this loop from happening. So it's also really funny because we also have Sprocket and we have Crank, and so while they're both also talking to one another, and Sprocket is to state that the Power Rangers had gone on and went back to the command center. Like once both Crank is talking to Sprocket, Sprocket then realizes like, well, hey, like, doesn't this like seems like familiar to you? And Crank is like, no, because of course, like, how would Crank really notice this? Or is it Crank or is it? I'm sorry, Clank. My bad. Clank. One word off. So we have the cause of all this being that Prince Sprocket wanted to repeat this day over and over again, so that way Prince Gasket, or what did I say? Prince Gasket wanted to repeat the day over and over again to give more time for the Cog Battle Fleet to make their way onto planet Earth and have all the time in the world to build their army to try and take over the Earth without the Power Rangers expecting anything. So I guess since the Cog Battle Fleet is off in space, their days aren't repeating, but it's giving them all the time in the world to put all this cog battle fleet together so they can invade the Earth without the Power Rangers realizing it. So we have the Rangers that go on to make their way to this snow globe looking thing to try to take it down. And that's, of course, when we unleash both Sprocket and Clank with all the cogs to help out the monster, who is actually the Protectatron. Goofy random name for a monster that is just a random, like, visually cool looking, I'll admit that. But, like, I don't get the whole, like, protecting thing. Like, does it have a force field? Like, how is it exactly a protector? Is it kind of like one of those, like, football kind of characters that it blocks? I didn't really quite get that. So we have, of course, the Power Rangers that go on and fight against these cogs and the Protectatron. And we have Sprocket and we have Clank, who's just like, well, okay, like, we're going to come in here and help out this monster and help out my brother's plan, I guess, because, like, considering our plan went sideways, we might as well just help him out. So we also have Gasket and Archerina. They're making the clear consensus. They're like, well, like, hey, yeah, it's too bad that, like, Sprocket is to somehow get caught in this loop also, but maybe him being involved in this will help us out without us knowing it. So yeah, so we have the cogs, the Power Rangers take on all the cogs, and so we have Sprocket, who tells Clank to go on, of course, to make the Protectatron, like, hey, like, make my monster grow. And so we have Clank that goes on and chucks, via this chain, Orbis chucks him and toss him on the monster that, of course, had fallen down by being attacked by the Rangers. And so the monster ends up growing big. And so we have Jason, who is telling the Rangers, is like, hey, go on and go into getting your Super Zeozords. Because, of course, we had Tommy that broken the weird, goofy snow globe thing. The Cronaceus, whatever goofy word that is, of course, stated. That I had probably stated maybe correctly somewhere. So, why do they always have to have these goofy words? But then again, think of the years of Billy having to go on and state all these goofy words of that he somehow remembers, but still. I could just imagine if I were to have ever gone on into a Power Ranger season, especially if I was much younger. Hey, Billy was like 32 when he was casted as Mighty Morphin. Yeah. But still, like, I would actually have to have skills that would actually fit into a Power Ranger season, which I don't have. So, fighting skill, not so much. Dancing skill, not so much either. So we, of course, would go on and state that Tommy had gone on to crush the snow globe, which led to then having the Make My Monster Grow moment. We end up having the Super Zeo Zords that come being shot out of the Zeo Zord hangar. That looks to me like just some cannon-looking thing. That I'm like, okay, that looks so weird. More than likely, they like thoroughly explained it in some early parts of the Zeo episodes, and I never got to that. So it's a cannon-looking mechanism. So, or no, because I think they had like a certain assortment of Z. So these are the Super Zeos, so that's completely different. Because uh, before the original Gold Ranger left, I think he gave the Power Rangers the Super Zeo Zords. So like this is kind of like not even in the beginning of Zeo. This is really just like at some leaving off point of the Gold Ranger, the original one, where he was like triplets, where he was where he had like three different versions of himself, and legitimately there was three guys that all looked the same. They hired triplets, and so I was like, cool. So that I found out later on, I was like, oh, like there's actually three guys out there. They're all the same guy. Anyways, pushing on. So we of course go on to have the Super Zeo Zords Megazorded up to be the Super Zeo Megazord. And I'm just thinking, I'm like, okay, like, how is this Zord gonna really wipe this monster out this time around? And for the life of me, like, heaven forbid I remember how they kill off. Oh, no. I know. The Megazord tries to fight off the Protectatron, and then we weirdly have another product that Power Rangers has to sell, which is the Warrior Wheel, my bad. The goofy football-looking thing, that's the Warrior Wheel. And so they call for the Warrior Wheel that like comes rolling down the Power Ranger's arm, and so the Warrior Wheel goes on to attack the monster and wipes it out. And then now both the Super Zeo Megazord and the Warrior Wheel both standing there like, yeah, we took this down. But man, I wish that there could have really been more to do with the repeated day. I like the repeated day idea. I love that in movies and shows and whatever. Like if they really could have even had like a two-parter, because they have so many episodes to do with Power Rangers anyways, why not just have the repeated day thing be like a two-parter? That would have been sweet. I would have been won over by that. And we could have 2 episodes worth of Tommy just dealing with this repeated day, and like him having several different variations of the repeated day, because why not? Maybe he goes on is like, God, I'm sick of this repeated day. I've been through it too often. Like we could also just like state that like, okay, this is a repeated day number 13. This is a repeated day number 45. Repeated day number 100. Tommy's just like, God, Jason, shaved ice. Yeah, I get it. I'm sick of you talking to me about Melanie. One of the repeated days, me and Melanie just got married. Even though I know I'm supposed to be, like, at some point in a comic book being married to Kimberly, but still. I'm sick of you, Jason, telling me about shaved ice. I'm sick of this. So, we go on to, of course, have the Megazord moment. So we again have Gasket and we have Sprocket, who are bickering back and forth, like of course brothers would do. We have Queen Machina that is going on, and just kind of watching her sons just kind of bicker back and forth. So really, is there any is there anything else that I think goes after that? I'm trying to think if there's any kind of repeated things, or anything that just kind of gets like to have Tommy just like, like no more repeated day. What, like, I think how they should have ended this episode was to go on and have Tommy wake up the very next day and start to realize things are now different in school. He's like going on with him and Kat, and he's thinking like, oh my god, this day is going to be the same, but then all of a sudden we just have something tweakingly different, and then he's like, oh my god, this is a new day. Yeah, and then that's how they should have ended the episode. But with that said, I think speaking about oh my god, I'm almost an hour and 25. I didn't realize how long that was going to take. Why did this take so long? Compared to all the other ones where it took roughly an hour. My apologies. I'm sorry for how long this took. But I'm going to get out of here. Hopefully everything else was to be done with for all of this, and I stated everything in the way of which that this episode was to play out. So I'm going to try to go on and get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy. All right. So at the end of Zeo, we do actually have a Bulk and Skull moment for episode 43, because I made that mistake. And so we have all the Power Rangers going into the juice bar to then have the characters finally state it's like, okay, like, I guess finally that time loop is now over, right? And we all of a sudden have both Bulk and we all of a sudden have both Skull that are no longer wearing their undercover clothes, and now they're just back to their like punk rocker clothes. And we all of a sudden have both Bulk and Skull that go to the juice bar and are again getting a soda, and we again have Tommy having that weird feeling, and Bulk ends up going on to open this pop, and it sprays and hits them in the face, and we again have all the characters as like, well, hey, like, I guess classics will just never die, and everybody just has a good laugh. And we also have Bulk that goes on to like put soda in Skull's face to just kind of get even, so everybody has a good laugh. The episode ends. So with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, buddy. Bye, buddy.